Well, the 1919 race riots have left a significant mark on Chicago's psyche. It's still something that we talk about all the time.
In 1919, Chicago was just one place in a world being reshaped by war and immigration. But that global turmoil provided the backdrop to a local eruption of violence. It was violence sparked right here, the shores of Lake Michigan, on July 27th, 1919. And nearly 100 years later, the landscape may have changed, but the scars left behind have not. In 1919, troops were coming home from World War I. But those troops were also returning during the largest immigration waves in U.S. history. From 1900 to 1920, the population of America increased by nearly 40%. That made for a fierce competition for jobs, like at the stockyards of South Chicago.
Well, the stockyards with a couple of other major industries in Chicago were one of the gigantic employers, employing several thousand people. Most of them by that time, by 1919, were Southern and Eastern European immigrants. Also, within the last 5 years, African Americans were coming from places like Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana to northern cities. Mississippians were especially coming to Chicago on the Illinois Central Railroad to get jobs in meatpacking, also in steel, also in the railroads. So you had a bit of sort of forced integration. Sometimes African Americans would also come in to the industry as scabs, as replacement workers. So not only were there these racial tensions, but on top of that, often there were labor tensions that would be created in a place like the meatpacking industry on the South Side.
With those racial and social tensions in the background, a day at the beach ignited a week of intense fighting that left dozens dead and entire neighborhoods burnt.
July 27, 1919, a teenage African-American man by the name of Eugene Williams, who could not swim, was in a bit of a makeshift raft. And he was out on Lake Michigan, and he departed from the 29th Street beach. And this is an era we think of the South as being segregated. Well, in Chicago, none of this was enforced by law, but it was enforced by custom. So there were strict dividing lines between the 26th Street beach, which was for whites, and the 29th Street beach, which was supposed to be for African Americans. Eugene Williams' raft drifted over close enough to 26th Street beach, that is the white beach. People started to notice that basically he was desegregating the water, if that's possible. And some people threw rocks at him. He was eventually hit in the head, and he was still in the water. More rocks were thrown at him, and he eventually drowned. What some African-American beachgoers tried to do was to appeal to, of course, at that time, an all-white Chicago police force. Basically, they got no response. There were no efforts to arrest the whites who threw the rocks. And in fact, as the riots went on, starting with July 27th, went on from there, the police were either non-responsive or, in fact, responsive against the African-American communities of the South Side.
Mobs of mostly young white men terrorized African-American neighborhoods, but violence broke out in all parts of the city.
You see a lot of young people, especially Southsiders, whites, who were getting involved in not just violence, but looting and burning and those kinds of things that we associate with riots in the 21st century.
Confrontations led to the deaths of 25 black and 13 white Chicagoans. Fires or vandalism also left more than 1,000 black families homeless. It was a scene born from poverty, immigration, and our nation's unfortunate relationship with race, a situation poetically summed up by Carl Sandburg, who once worked for the Chicago Daily News.
The riots furnished an excuse for every element of gangland to go for it and test their prowess by the most ancient ordeals of the jungle. So on the one hand, we have blind, lawless government, failing to function through policemen ignorant of Lincoln, the Civil War, and Emancipation Proclamation, and a theory sanctioned and baptized in a storm of red blood. And on the other hand, we have a gaunt involuntary poverty from which issues the hoodlum.
Chicago's mayor eventually called in the state militia, which, along with a massive rainstorm, helped calm the situation. The riots were over. The underlying problems remained. As in 1919, then an invisible line, and forced to keep two sets of Americans from becoming one.